Thank you so very much. I appreciate the invitation to be here. I'm happy to be a part of all this. I don't have any slides. I was going to talk a little off the cuff because I'm a bit of a historian for the Emmy CFS clinical and research community. I started in this field in the 80s. At the same time, we were coping with HIV epidemic. Oh, thank you so much. And so, sorry, I just had to relocate in my house. It got very noisy all of a sudden when you're about to unmute me. The grandchildren arrived. Anyway, I remember the early years, and I'm not talking about just a few years, the early first 20 years of this of MECFS clinical care, that nearly much all of it. And at one point, at a State of the Science meeting in the mid 90s, I was invited the day before the meeting because they looked at their agenda and realized when the advocates pointed it out that they had not a single speaker who was not a psychiatrist talking at the State of the Science meeting on an illness that was increasingly being discovered to be a neuroinflammatory disorder. And so that was our beginning. And I will say at our beginning and ever since, our funding has been terrible, absolutely terrible. We've been booted from institute to institute. We were booted out of NIAID, the allergy immunology, where you think might be a good home base for us, to the Office of Women's Health, which sounds fabulous, except they have no budget. They're not an institute. They have to beg the money from all the institutes. So it was more of a political maneuver back in the 90s to shift across that way. And recently we were shifted to the Institute for Neurologic Diseases, which has been a great home base. Here we've actually found a passionate group of people at the Institute who have been working hard to try to advance the field and develop the collaborations across the multitudes of institutes. Nonetheless, the funding has been very poor. And our average funding, this is shocking, has been in the $3 to $6 million range for the entire country for an illness that affects 1 million people and throws them on their knees in the height of their productive years. It's been a very distressing thing to discover that there's more, I looked it all up, there's more funding for male pattern baldness there is for ME/CFS coming out of the NIH. And that is a sad state of affairs. And so I would charge this beautiful advocacy committee that has done so much to try to get the ear of our policymakers to continue working very, very hard to advance this area. Now, COVID presents an interesting opportunity. As many people have heard, this so-called long haulers illness of people who aren't recovering from COVID is shockingly disproportionately affecting women over men. A big surprise, a chronic inflammatory condition. And it's so new that we can't say yet, is this ME/CFS? Sounds like it if you read the symptoms list and you read some of the early work on the biomarkers. But is it? We don't know. The work has to be done. Happily, Congress has actually said to NIH and put some money behind it to get a whole lot of work done in this COVID, and then we're tagging on the post-COVID piece to it. And so this is our little opportunity. The first time I've been doing this, like I say, since the 80s, no opportunity has ever arisen, ever, that would give us the opportunity not just to understand an illness, but to do something about it. We have been sitting with program announcements for, do the math, 30 years that don't move on to intervention. They're entirely about trying to figure out what's wrong with people with very modest funding. And at no point have we been given a clinical trials opportunity or an opportunity to actually take the knowledge we do have and do something with it, help people. And so it's time, really, really good timing right now with this post-COVID epidemic to say a number of things. If ever there was a time to intervene on an illness to try to prevent it from becoming a lifelong horrible illness, it's in the first months of the illness. Right now, in the post-COVID group, we should be doing things, helping them learn how to take care of themselves, but also putting into play some kick-ass good clinical trials that could really help people, but also teach us what we need to know for the Emmy CFS population that became ill before COVID. So this is a terribly important time to take advantage of this new funding impetus, and the attention, and this long haulers disease has been an opportunity to move chronic fatigue syndrome from this, sexist, just a bunch of tired ladies, or psychosomatic illness early indication. This first 20 years of funding that funded that to move on and get to the biology of the illness and get in there and intervene where the time is right now, advocacy right now, scientists like me, quick, write your grants, get them in for the October round, jump in there, get done. Now, the other special group of people that I take care of, and I feel like if women are left in the dust, women veterans are left in the dust. Oh, those poor women veterans. They've been through everything a male veteran has been, being biologically more vulnerable to inflammation. And so they have the toxic injuries that the guys had, but they get a bigger injury from it. They have more chronic injury from it. They have not just the risk of going to war on behalf of our country, but they have the risk of lifelong PTSD because of military of rape in the military that has traumatized them in such numbers that every single one of us should be appalled and wonder why we let our daughters join the service. So I think that you really need to think also, as we're moving forward in our advocacy world, don't leave women veterans behind. They're more vulnerable. They've had more exposures. There's this whole concept in research about brain diseases that involve chronic neuroinflammation, is this multiple hit thing. And it also applies to migraines. Did you have a toxic injury? Did you have a traumatic injury, like a automobile accident or traumatic brain injury, even very mild? Do you have repeated injuries? And then all the things that really make that worse, if you don't have an anti-inflammatory biologic response at that time that's rapid and quick and good, you're going to be more likely to fall into a chronic disease state. So women are biologically more prone because we have less natural anti-inflammatory. We have no testosterone to speak of, which is very anti-inflammatory, and other hormones that are normally made that can be protective. And so there's a reason why women are more vulnerable, and it's a focus of a lot of research to try to better understand that vulnerability. But let it be said, women are more vulnerable to having chronic disease happen from an acute injury in your brain. And so that's very important. I also want to speak to this HR 7057. It's a bill that's going around right now that has some great advantages that we should all get in behind, because I've discovered, and it's so hard as a clinician, and I just say, I don't know if I was introduced as a clinician, but I am a physician with, as I say, more than almost 40 years of experience now taking care of people with these illnesses, is that it's really hard to take care of people that are out of state. So telehealth has become what we're really relying hard on in the post-COVID era. It has been such a boon to the ME/CFS population because y'all are too darn sick to come to the doctor a lot. You miss tons of appointments. You don't follow through on a whole lot of things because you don't feel well enough to do it. And suddenly, with a little break in the window of the law, we're allowed to do telehealth. We're allowed to do it. We get paid for it as if you were in our office. How exciting for us to actually have a model in our clinic that allows us to actually care for you. To give you a sense of this, a chronic fatigue syndrome hour of care in our clinic is billed at a Medicare rate. It's around $250 an hour-ish. A telephone call for the same amount is $25. We can't operate like that. But a telehealth visit for that is $250. Now I can have enough doctors, have the nurses, have the things we need to be able to actually do the care. So telehealth is a really important thing. But our lawyers at our university did a state-by-state review of where and when we can do telehealth, and it is practically nil outside the state of Florida. We have 14 states where I'm allowed to talk on the phone, not telehealth, just talk on the phone to you without your provider in the room. There's pretty much the rest of the states where I have to have the provider in the room, and 2 states, California and Illinois, where I can't talk to you or your provider. Sorry, my license doesn't cover that. I'm not allowed to have a conversation with your doctor. That's nuts. It's just crazy. How do you practice medicine that way? And so as we're trying to develop these post-COVID clinics and post-COVID clinics sort of wrapped into our Emmy CFS clinics, we have to have the capacity to provide care nationally and not just in this state. And this HR 7057, in part, its focus is to do that, to extend the Medicare latitude that allowed us to do more care during the COVID epidemic and extend it beyond the COVID epidemic and continue that kind of care.